Hello. So in this video, we are going to learn about conditionals and control flow. So what exactly a conditional and control flow? They are basically what you can call while and if statement. And what they actually do is that they basically give what you call logic and some kind of a mind to a program. And normally when we write a program, it basically has to prove its usefulness. So programs actually prove their usefulness with the help of conditionals and control flow. So I will give you a small example here. So if I were to say if, so for example, let's do variable a is equal to 4 and b is equal to 5, and then I will to say if a is less than b, and then I'll use this semicolon, not semicolon, this colon here. You can see this colon that you use here is something that is used for creating a scope in Python, and then you just press enter. So we do not use brackets or anything like that here in Python. We just use this semicolon to create a scope, and then I'll just simply say print. Um, so if I were to say a is less than b, then I'll just simply say a is less than b, and then I'll just go to next line and I'll say else, and then once again I'll put this colon here, okay, and then I'll press enter. But here it is giving you this squiggly line. So what does it actually mean? So what happens is that in Python, in order to maintain the proper scope, we need to put objects currently and rightly below each other, in a proper manner. For example, I'm giving a tab here, so from here if line I go to the next line, and then when I go to else, I have to make sure that the else is in same line as with this if, okay, so that it basically means that it is having the same scope. So then I'll say else, and then I'll just say print, and I'll this time around I will say is that a is greater than b, and when I run this particular code, you will see the output here. A is less than B, which is the correct output. But here I would like to go back again to the concept of a scope in Python. Normally what would happen is we could say something like if A is less than B, and then we would use this kind of a curly braces. Here in Python, we do not use curly braces. Python is a very simple language in the sense that it just uses this particular colon, and then after colon you press enter. So how do we actually decide where to put this particular next else? So if you put it somewhere else, it will automatically start giving you error. So you already know that the scope is wrong. Else is basically now existing outside of an if block, and else in its own cannot exist. So you will get an idea, and you can just basically, if you put it over there, you can see that it is not giving you any answer here. So you have to be aware of this problem, that if such a problem happens, then you just need to make sure that codes are actually in the right context of the scope here. So this is what I wanted to mention, along with telling you about the conditionals and control flow. So again, for example, if in the case of another example, if you say that we don't want to perform any action if A is less than B, for example. So if we have to say A is less than B, and I will just want to say that I don't want to perform any action here in this particular case. So what I can do is that I can use a keyword which is known as pass. So what this basically means is that it basically does nothing. Okay, so I can do that, and then I come back again, else I can print once again A is greater than B. If I run this code this time around, there will be no output because I have said pass for A is less than B. So I run that, and you will see that it is once again printing A is less than B, which is for the upper loop. So I will just comment it out, and there you go. Now I'll run it again, and you will see there will be no output. So there is no output right now. Now if I were to change the value of A to 6 and I were to run it again, so let's see what happens. Now it says A is greater than B. So what we actually learn here is the fact that if you want to pass on any particular condition and don't want to perform anything, then you can actually literally use the pass keyword here. Okay, then there is also another way of dealing with it. Suppose I take a variable and I call it suffix. Suppose I go down and I create a variable and I say suffix. And if I were to give it a value of .htm, okay. And then if I were to go and say check if suffix is equal to dot htm. Then I will perform a particular operation. I will say uh, content is equal to image slash jpeg. Then if I were to say uh, multiple times, I have to check if suffix is html or png or jpg. Then how do you do it? So instead of else here, this time around I will use elif. So else if suffix is equal to dot png, then what I will say, then I will say content is equal to, I'll say image forward slash png. Okay, so this is the way I can actually keep changing them. For example, here I will just use html, and then I can say else. After this particular condition, I can say else, and I can now put forward that particular condition. Then I can say, for example, raise runtime error unknown type, and then I can run this particular code. Okay, so let's see what happens. Now we have a suffix in the form of htm, and then suppose I want to print this particular content as well. So I can basically go ahead, assign the value to the content, and then print it as well in the next stage. And here I go, and then I can repeat this process here as well in the next block. And now if I were to run it, we should actually print what you call image slash html. So if I run this particular code now, let's see what happens. Okay, so this one is from the upper block here. So I'll just comment it out, and then I'll just run it again, and then you see what happens. Image html, so we got the right thing. Now if I were to change this to png, and then let's see what happens. So we get image PNG. Now, if I were to change it to something else, for example, other than these two conditions, for example, if I were to say something like JPG, then what happens? Then an error will be raised. There you go. It says runtime error, and it says unknown type. So in this way, you see how we can actually create these various conditions. Now, in this particular case, I wanted to be informed of the error. Therefore, I actually created an error which will create this trace back, which basically says that the code is blown up somewhere. So the code is not properly performing. So in this particular case, it's giving you the line and telling you everything about it, where the code is actually blown up. And you can see it is giving you 24, 25, 26, and this arrow is actually pointing from, this is where the error is coming, and this is where you can actually use this runtime error function to create and give you the information that the code is stopped working, and actually the code should stop working. I could have simply said here print error, but that print does not mean that the code would blow up. Okay, now if I were to run this thing, you can see I will just get error, but the code actually runs, so the application will run. So in case you don't want the application to run and stop and give you an error, you can use runtime error. Okay, so now look at some of the other aspects of loop. So now there is also what you call the while loop. Okay, so let's have a look at the while loop as well now. So we will now look at the while loop, which is also one of the ways in which we implement the conditions. So let's say we want to implement a code. For example, I were to say x is equal to, suppose, 0, and then I will say while x equal to x plus 1 is less than 10, then I'll just simply say print x, and then I'll just print this particular command. So let's see what happens. Okay, so I print it, and you see I get up to 9. So I'll just comment out this upper code here so I don't get the error in the block. So I just run it, and then you see I get 1 2 3 4 6 7 8 9. Now here what actually happens is that you can see I've used this operator. This is known as the walrus operator. So what it does is that it does two things. It basically increments the value of x as well. Now I could have simply written, instead of this operator, I could have simply said while x is less than 10. Okay, this would have been more than sufficient for me. While x is less than 10, then I'll print x, but there I also will need to provide a particular value for it. So then I would have to give x is equal to x plus 1. This will do the same thing. It will print from 1 to 9. So let's run it, and you will see it prints from 0 to 9. So I could have just simply put it over here, and then it does the same thing from 1 to 10. So now what basically happens is that what the walrus operator does is that it, from the very initial stage, it basically gives you an incremented value. You know what it does is that it gives you an incremented value. So here x is automatically getting incremented to 1, and it is being checked whether it is less than 10 or not. So let's see what if I were to run it in this kind of a condition. You will see the number of options will be less. We will have to remove this line and comment it out. And now if I were to run, let's see what happens. So x initial value was 0. It was incremented to 1 here in the very initial stages itself. So it begins from 1. And then, you will see it stops at actually 9. So what happens is that when it reaches 10, and then the comparison takes place. So that's why 10 is not getting printed here. In the case of we removing this particular condition from here, if I were to say x is less than 10, and then if I were to say something like this, then you will see that the 10 is getting printed because the condition is getting checked later on. So the walrus operator actually is a good operator because it checks the condition before the proper execution of the loop takes place. So this is one of the things with the loop value. Now we will check about continue statement and break statement in while. So if I were to say something like this, and then what I would say is that if x is equal to 5, for example, then I'll just simply say break, and then I'll print this thing. So I've already incrementing the value, so I will not be incrementing the value. So what will happen is that it will print, and when once it gets to 5, let's see what happens. Here you see what happens. It basically stops, but the functionality is still going on, because what actually happens when it sees 5, it will loop out and completely break this particular code, and it will not work again. On the other end, if you were to use a particular keyword like continue, then let's see what happens. We run this thing all over again, and you see it runs, and it skips 5, and then it continues from 6, 7, 8, 9. So this is what the difference between break it. A break will basically stop the loop. If I were to say something like this, it basically it stops the loops and moves to a final execution. In this case, we did not have anything, so it just basically stopped the particular loop. And what does continue do? Continue basically, if you look at it, continue basically skips and goes back to the start of the loop. So it basically skips and goes to the start of loop. So this is what continue will do. So this is the difference between these two, and this is what I had to explain to you today. So see you in the next assignment. Thank you so much.